So with that, we give you Wes Spencer.
Right on.
See you, buddy.
Appreciate it. Man, it's awesome to be with you. I do live in Tampa, but I flew in super late last night. Anyone have any flight delays? I think like Southwest was down again, and that was super fun. So I got in around like 1:30 and hit some meetings. Then I'm flying back out tonight to go chill with my family. We're in Nashville for some stuff, but like when Adam asked me to do this, I'm like, absolutely, this is going to be super fun. I love all of this. So what we're going to talk about today is, and I guess do I just use this button here? Just push the button? Is that the best way to do it? Okay. I tend to roam, so I'll make sure to walk back. So I'm not going to talk to you about this. You read this slide and you're like, great. Really? Like another like sales conversation? I'm actually not going to talk to you about selling at all. We're not going to use a bunch of technical terms, and I'm not going to teach you. I could not care less about things like sales methodologies and things like that, as great as they are. What I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you how to speak to decision makers in a way that they will listen to you and you'll get some buy-in. This has been something that's been cooking up in my brain for quite some time, and I have learned just lessons learned in experience in enterprise. So I used to be a CIO at a bank, and it took a lot of time to learn how to speak the language of my board, to get budgets defended, to get a security strategy going. And when I look at a lot of my MSP friends, this is an area that we all struggle with. Now, maybe you're here and you're like, no, I got this. Here's my challenge for you. How many people in your MSP got this? Most don't. I'll give you an example. So often I have a conversation like this. Someone's like, Wes, I just hired a new sales rep and I'm really excited about her. She's got an incredible personality, a huge go-getter. She loves technology. I'm like, right on. That's awesome. He's like, yeah. And I just found her from the AT&T store and was getting a new phone, and she's just amazing. And I'm like, right, that's great. He's like, so now I have to get her trained and like get her educated. And like, I don't know how I do this. Right? He's like, she's really sitting on her haunches until I can bring her into meeting after meeting to where I feel comfortable to let her loose. That's the problem that we have among so many MSPs is we're not hiring from CrowdStrike. We're not hiring from Cisco. We're hiring from people off the street that we know and like and trust. And then we have to build and we have to address, they've got the aptitude, we have to address the knowledge gaps. And that's the challenge. And that's what I want to talk about today. So just a couple things about me. I am the CEO and founder of Empath Cyber. It's a platform that's all about training MSPs on a lot of what we're talking about. I'm also the channel chief at Fifth Wall Solutions. Any Fifth Wall partners here in the room? Awesome. Yeah, Scott, I knew. Yeah, so we're a cyber insurance distributor. Think of us like Pax8, as a distributor. Same thing in cyber insurance. So we work with about 43 carriers as of today, and we help MSPs and their clients solve that challenge. We have an awesome free education learning gateway. So just go to fifthwallsolutions.com/MSP if you want to see what we're doing. Really, really cool stuff. Was a banker, recovering bankster, was at Perch Security as well. Many of you guys know Perch. Aaron's here as well. We did some really fun things there together. So that's a little bit about me. If you do want to see and follow me on any of these places, don't tell Matt Lee I put that QR code in there. But I always do that. And then I always say that about Matt. And he forgives me every time, I think. He's full of forgiveness. But that's all the channels if you want to find me. Also, I do a bunch on YouTube as well, just covering stuff that is interesting to me. So let's start with this as a level set. Your clients just don't care. They just don't. By default, they don't care. Now, I know sometimes I'll say something like that on LinkedIn and someone's like, yeah, but Wes, my clients do care. I'm like, right, they do care because you're doing something right. How many times do you just walk into a client that you know is deficient in technology? I'm not talking about one of these that you've had for 3 to 5 years and you've been working and building a trust relationship. I'm not talking about that. Just the generic one. You walk into and you see, man, they're like 3 to 5 years behind on their technology. They're still running Windows 7 everywhere. They're still running like Symantec antivirus, if even that. How many times do you see those clients are like, yes, technology is really big for us. And like, I really care about that. It just doesn't happen. There's a huge disconnect and gap. And here's, actually, let me ask you guys, why do you think that that disconnect exists? I think there's a lot of reasons, but I want to hear from you guys. Why do you think there is that disconnect? Yeah.
People are afraid of change.
Afraid of change, 100%. What else?
Money.
Yeah.
Money is a big one.
It's a cost center for them, right? Like this is something that costs
money
money.
down the toilet.
Yep, you're affecting my ability to be profitable. You're eating into my distributions. Yep.
I think MSPs don't have the correct language, so they understand
Yes.
what's going on.
1000%. Missing the language barrier that's there. Were you going to say something else?
Yeah, they also don't want to act as if they are not up to speed.
Right. Yeah, they don't want to be the ones that are like, yeah, not with the times. No one wants to admit that, right? For sure. Anyone else have a final one? Education. Yep, we're going to talk about all of these things. So you guys pretty much nailed all of it. There's an education gap that exists as well. So they just don't naturally think about this. They don't naturally care about this, but there is a way to shift that conversation. And a lot of it actually deals with you more than them. And that's an area of gaps. I'm gonna unpack that in just a little bit. The other thing too is I always joke and say they don't care until they do care. And all of a sudden they care. And in my mind, there's a few things that kind of make them care. And I'm curious if you have any others. But one thing that makes them care is they finally go through an incident. And all of a sudden, that is the worst way to make a client care. The worst way. I have a good friend who is enterprise CISO. And he said, I heard him speak on stage one time in front of like 2,000 people. And he said, the easiest way I found to get my board to care and invest in cyber is to have a breach. And he goes, I know what I'm talking about. It's happened to me 2 times in a row. And I joke, but that's the truth. Now, here's the downside to this. What's the first thing they do when all of a sudden they care because of the breach? They point their finger at you and they say, how could you have let this happen? It's your fault. You do security for me. What's that? That's right. Right. They think all things IT, which means all things security, which means I'm not going to get hit by something. That's the default knee-jerk, right? That's one of the big challenges is they have that preconceived notion that we must educate them out of. So that's one area. The second way that they sometimes start to care is when someone else comes into their territory and starts teaching them and starts educating and starts getting them to understand why cyber matters. Maybe that's a competitor. Maybe that's just a buddy that they do business with and they're on the golf course together and he's like, dude, we had this breach thing and like, whoa, it wasn't good. Like we weren't doing all these things I found out and now I've got these lawsuits going and I still have lost revenue from like lost business and he's going on and on and on. What's the other guy do? What's your client do? He goes, really? Now you have an adversarial relationship, don't you? Because now that client looks at you and they're like, you haven't been doing all the things that you need to be doing. And I didn't know that. Now I don't trust you. That's a huge problem. So then the third way that we get them to care is we do what we're talking about now, a talk just like this. How do we educate them in a way that matters to them, that affects change for them without being like slimy, without being like overly scary? How many times do we know in these cyber talks, we all give and we scare them into caring, right? All these really dark web, dank web things, right? And then they're like, whoa. And then what happens to those things? They care for like a week or a month, then nothing happens. And now you're the boy who cried wolf. Now you're just the one that, oh, yeah, there's that guy, those cyber guys, all they want to do is talk about this scary crap that's never going to happen to me, right? So that brings up this question, how do we get them to care? And we've already hinted at some of this. I mean, you guys gave some great advice. We've got to educate them. We've got to teach them. We've got to make it relevant to them. So I'm going to go through a couple things that I have learned over the years that I think are really effective, that I've been battle tested, my friends. I've done the same thing that you have done. I've been in those shoes of how do we get non-technical people to buy in. So usually we knee jerk to this right here, right? Well, we just have to align to business objectives and then we just move on. And you're like, okay, that sounds good. Sounds like something Simon Sinek would say. It's probably correct, but what does that mean? You ever been left with that? Like, what does that actually mean to say, well, I've got to align to business objectives? Well, let me ask you guys, what does that mean in your ears and in your mind?
Nothing.
It means nothing? Okay. Buzzwords? Okay, well, I agree. It is buzzwords. So let's clear that out. What should it mean? Let me ask it that way.
Figure out how they make money and protect it.
There you go. Figure out how they make money and protect it. One of my really good friends, Brian Blakely, if you guys know Brian, if you don't follow him on LinkedIn, talks about the whole how do I make money conversation. If there's one thing a business owner will talk to you all day long is how they make money. For sure. So that is exactly right. That's how we begin to insert the conversation. What else would you say? Scott?
I always say that by saying, find out what they value.
Find-
And then, yes, like what is valuable to them.
understand truly how they do business and why they do things the way they do.
Love that. Love that. You guys all hear that? So let's find out how they how they do business, how they love what they do, and let's make sure we insert into that conversation. Yes. So I hear this all the time, but I think what really helps is when you start being a good question asker and instead of like a big talker, and really start to ask them, tell me more about your business. What are you talking about? I'm a machine shop. I make these things for this client. Well, that's awesome. But tell me how that works. I'm actually really curious. I'm a nerd, right? So I want to know like how your business works. I'm like, yeah, I want to talk about your clients, but like, what is it you actually do? And how does it work? You will find they will start talking and they'll start explaining things. You're going to be taking notes. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, so this goes over here. I got to make a star on that. I got to talk and dive into that one. I have found that one of the biggest gaps that we IT people have is we don't become a student of our clients. We don't actually spend the time to understand how they operate. One of the things I was talking about a couple weeks ago was I learned this myself at my bank. So I'll just give you a stupid story, but was an eye-opening moment. So we got one of my help desk folks got a ticket that came in that some of our loan ops people's like their inboxes were full. This is still in the exchange days of like 2013. I'm like, how can that be? Like I've got a huge inbox sizes and no one else is even close. So we start looking into it. Yep, sure enough, like 4 or 5 of them are completely full. I'm like, will you go over there, head over to their campus and ask some questions? I just want to find out more about this. So he sits down and starts talking to him and discovers that what they've been doing is when the loan documentation platform outputs some loan stuff that comes out, it comes out in a PDF, and basically that spits it out, right? So they take that PDF and they email it to a person in loan operations who picks that PDF up, they open it up, they make some changes because they're all digital in nature, right? So they're doing it all in Acrobat, making the changes, and they flatten it, they save it. And then what they do is because they have to have an audit trail, guess what they do? They take the original email, they copy that as an EML file as an attachment into a new email along with the updated PDF. Now that sounds terrible, but get this. Then the next loan ops person picks this up and they're looking for like the regulation stuff. So they pick it up. They do their changes. They save the original email with an attachment from the first email in along with the new PDF. And before you know it, these guys are trading like 100 meg files left and right. They're doing these all day long. I had no idea this was happening. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, that's how you do business? And they're like, well, it seemed good to us. And that's the answer. See, your clients are like water. They're always going to find the path of least resistance. Always. So if we're not injecting ourselves into what they're doing and creating value points throughout, we're missing it. And security is the same way. Now, I realize what's probably going through your mind is that's easy for you to say, but I have to make this profitable for me, right? Like, I can't just send my BCIO into all these businesses and learn their business operations. I would challenge you, first of all, if your pricing doesn't reflect the ability to do that, you got to rethink that. Secondly, what you're going to find is a lot of billable services and hours come out of that opportunity. And I do think that's a huge future for MSPs, by the way, just throwing this out there, is like business transformation. How do we as MSPs get into those businesses and help them operate at new levels of efficiency? See, the big four, like, all the big advisory firms, they have millions of dollars in contracts they'll do with big orgs doing business transformation because they have years and years and years of tech debt. And then they get to this analysis paralysis. They don't know how to handle it. And they're finally like, big company, here's $1 million. Solve this for me and make it more efficient. Same thing down market. We're just not addressing that. So I'm just throwing that out there. I think that's a huge future point. So one of the things we really want to talk about is this idea of like taking control of the conversation for a minute. So I think, so you just mentioned this. What was your name? Okay, now I know. Okay, I know we know each other. So I love like, how do I make money and how do I save money? I think if you boil a lot of like business discussions down, when we insert ourselves into these conversations, a lot of it, maybe not all of it, but a lot of it comes back to that. So I look at it sort of offense and defense, and I'm always thinking about that in my mind. Now, I'm not a sports guy. It's all sports ball to me, but I've been told this is like a slam dunk. Like that's how you like throw shade when you're just that elite. I have no idea who this guy even is. I don't even know it says Miami. I think it's the Heat. No idea, but this is pretty awesome, right? And this idea of like, I am going to show you how we can go on the offensive to make more money. It's not just about saving money. Saving money is important, but when we only talk about saving money, we're teaching the client we're a cost center and that's it. How do we become a value driver as well? So what I always tell clients is this, when I'm speaking to them, is I say 2 things for you. My job for you is to help you save money for sure, but also to be able to scale and grow efficiently and safely and securely. But when they hear that word scale, now they're all of a sudden like, wait a second, going back to that buzzword slide, maybe this MSP is aligned to my goal because I do want to be able to scale and I am growing and I do see like scale and growth problems. Right? That really starts to change that conversation. So try to go on the offensive before you go on the defensive, but there's always a need to go on the defensive too. There's always that need to say, look, it really is important that we are here not just to like protect your revenue and protect your business, but also to deal with all these external things that you got to deal with. Like maybe you are in payments in this whole, and you don't even know it, but this whole FTC safeguards thing is coming up. Anyone know about FTC safeguards? If it keeps getting delayed, if you don't know what it is, go research it. So this has to do with so many different businesses that you would not even believe, like especially car dealers. Great example. All of a sudden, I'm going on a rabbit trail, but it's worth it. All of a sudden, car dealers go from the most notoriously stingy companies to now being forced to do security because of safeguards. So go check out FTC safeguards, learn how that works in your business, and learn how to like get involved in that. Because now you become somebody that comes in as the hero, kind of saving that day for them and saying, hey, we can help you with this. Another example is cyber insurance. Over and over and over, I'm jumping on to calls with the MSP and the client got denied coverage. And the client has to have coverage because their suppliers mandate it for them. Toyota is a great example of this. Toyota now mandates that every one of their dealers carry $5 million in coverage. That is a significant amount of cyber insurance coverage, which means they got to do a lot more than the average. And so it's common. I'm jumping in, the client has failed, and now we're kind of talking through this. How can we help correct this so that you can become eligible and get what you need so you can do business? Same kind of thing. That defensive mechanism is really powerful. So the other thing that we have to talk about too, when we're talking about aligning ourselves to them, we also have to know their external requirements too. And this is one of the, I think, the biggest challenges that MSPs face is you do have to be a jack of all trades. You do have to learn how to juggle all of these things that they have to care about. Because if we all know IT is integrated into literally everything the business does. So because of that, if you want to play with banks, you got to learn the bank world. You have to know who FFIEC is, what this conglomeration is. You have to know the IT handbook and the security handbook. You have to understand how banks go through their audit processes. Same thing with healthcare. Same thing with all these other industries. You have to know it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with just picking one or two industries and saying, we're going to build mastery over these two, and we're going to own this space. And sure, we may pick up some other clients outside of that industry here and there, but we've really got to speak well. If we do this well and we understand it well, we can really grow revenue really effectively. So that external requirements is pretty important stuff. And it really typically comes down to these three areas. First is regulations that I just mentioned. So just dealing with all the things that happen externally. And keep in mind, regulations are a moving target. Don't ever assume that you understand where they're at. You should always, I think even in a quarterly basis, chat with your client and say, hey, Miss Bank CEO, can you tell me a little bit more about how stuff's going just from a regulatory perspective? Any audits you're dealing with? Any like third-party examinations coming up? Any like notes or like things that they've been telling you that you want to be thinking about that we can help you with? We just love to learn. We just want to make sure that we're working with you on those things. Oh my goodness. Clients love it. If they're regulated, they love that kind of stuff. And don't feel like you have to have the answer right then and there. You can absolutely be like, that's awesome. I don't have the answer to that, but we're going to go back and we're going to research it. Might have a couple questions for you. But that's the partnership that regulated entities absolutely love to have. Because I will tell you, usually when a regulated client fires an MSP, usually the reason for it is they're like, you know, that MSP just doesn't speak our language. They don't know our world. They don't seem passionate about it. And that's going to put me into a hole one day when I'm required to do X, Y, and Z and my MSP is not helping me with that. I got to move on. So it's a huge, huge defensive mechanism. Also supply chain. This is becoming more and more and more important. It's not just CMMC, but this whole idea of suppliers and vendors upstream and downstream have just changed the game for us because we saw this really, HIPAA was one of the very first with the business associate agreements, right? So like this idea of like pushing to your suppliers, if there's an EPHI breach, we want to be able to hold whoever is responsible. That's the whole reason the BAAs came about. But we're seeing this systemically become more and more important. I'll give you an example. I don't know if you saw, there's a threat actor called Black Cat. that had, they've really been hitting the scenes. If you went to Write a Boom, we really kind of dove into them quite a bit at Write a Boom. And they recently published a bunch of data from Amazon. And they said, we stole Amazon Rings, a bunch of their data. We have a bunch of information on your clients, a bunch of video evidence. And Amazon came back and said, no, you don't. We looked at all our systems. You did not hit anything. We know you did. And they're like, well, here it is. We're going to leak your data unless you pay up. In a little bit more research, the news came out that it wasn't Amazon that was breached. It was one of their suppliers. But guess who is being held responsible? Amazon is, at least from the bad guy's perspective. And because we have third-party and fourth-party requirements and regulations around this and state privacy laws around all of this, the law typically holds you responsible as well. So now you've been brought into a breach that you did nothing wrong yourself. You've just been caught into the supply chain. So these are things that we have to deal with, that we have to be ready for, that we have to educate our clients on. I asked a whole bunch of my folks, my MSPs, are you guys from supply chain? Are you involving this in your conversations at all? Almost all of them said no. We don't talk about this in QBRs. We don't, that is not something we talk about. Something to deal with, right? Yet another conversation. But I don't look at that as yet another thing to do. I look at that as yet another opportunity. Yeah.
Could you rewind just a second?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that you're saying the client, you're missing with the client?
On supply chain? So with supply chain, the client is responsible for taking information in and sending it out, right? That's their, if you just distill business, that's a lot of what's happening here, right? So you have suppliers that are giving you data that you're responsible for. You also are doing some amount of processing and delivery to somebody else down the line that you're also responsible for. So both sides of that party, what happens if you have an issue and data from their clients that you're dealing with all of a sudden gets exposed? You're now in the middle of that. Or if you're processing something for somebody else and you did nothing wrong, but you have a third-party supplier, let's just throw a doomsday scenario, an RMM. Let's say there's another RMM breach that happened. Did you do anything wrong with your RMM? No, it's probably a 0-day. You had everything best practice configured, but you're caught in the middle of that. Who does the client blame? They don't go to ConnectWise and be like, ConnectWise, how dare you? They're like, you have this thing on my computer. This ransomware thing is on you because you installed it. So this whole idea of supply chain is it gets us caught up in things that may not have anything to do with ourselves as far as the intentionality.
So you'll touch on things that we need to do to protect ourselves?
So I think two things in my mind around third and fourth party is one is you've got to make sure your MSAs are really clear, like laser clear on this stuff. If you don't have a good attorney, I'll give you 3. I'm not endorsed by any of them. I trade no dollars to them. You can use them or not. But 3 of my favorites to do this really well, Spencer Pollock is one, Eric Tildes is another, TILDS, and Brad Gross. You can use anyone you want, but those 3 I know are really good, and I say their names because I like them, but use what you want. But you've got to make sure your MSAs are going to protect you, and a lot don't. Most of those folks, because they're pretty much cyber focused only, they're able to speak into pretty much all states, but they'll tell you, just say, hey, what's your experience in XYZ state? I don't know. I know Eric is in Michigan. I know that for sure. The rest of them, just look them up. And Brad's in Florida. Oh, that's right. Brad is in, yeah, it's Spencer. I'm not sure.
Obviously, every state's got different.
Correct.
What names again?
Eric Tildes, Spencer Pollock, and Brad Groves. And there's probably plenty of others, right? So just want to say that. But those are 3 I know and like, and do a good job. So that goes on to the second part of the question is cyber insurance becomes a really big piece of this. A good cyber insurance policy will have what's called third-party coverage, which is exactly this. So you got caught up in something. Now you have lawyers and state attorneys general coming after you for data that's been disclosed that you had nothing to do with, but you've been caught up in the middle of this thing. That is what the carriers will do. They'll bring in, they actually have their own like breach coaches, which are attorneys that specialize in this stuff. So it's important. We can have a whole breakout talk just on third and fourth party, but just suffice to say this, start thinking about it, talk to your attorney about it, just make sure your company is protected and start educating your client. Okay, so we talked about cyber insurance. So maybe it's a little bit more like this. It's not that they don't care about security, it's that they do care about the risks that impact their business. That's what they care about. And so if we do a good job asking all these questions that we're leading up into this point right now, then all of a sudden I think we can be a whole lot more effective about all this. I'm doing a time check on myself here. And my phone's not looking. That's weird. Maybe I turned it off. That's weird. Okay, so let's move on. Would somebody give me, like Danielle or somebody gives me like a 5-minute warning? So they don't care about the technology, right? How many times do you do, like, I remember in my days at my bank, the vendors always like, fly you in, we'll do a data center tour. Like, as if that means anything. All you do is pay a bunch of money to them. You got to go through the man trap. You know, you got to, like, you know, we got all these walled, whatever you call those, cages and all that. Like, wow, you know, we're not on a flight zone path. Wow, you know, I remember those days. And you're just looking at this and you're like, that's cool and all, but it really means nothing to me. It really doesn't. And then the other thing that doesn't make any sense either is like the threat maps. I think we're finally done with that day. Jason's joking back there, but how many times do you see a picture of somebody's security operations center and you see the threat map and you're like, whoa. Again, those things can work for a short period of time. You're like, you mean someone's actually hitting me from Taiwan? Yeah, wow. You know, it means nothing. It's just snake oil, right? But they don't affect change. Those kinds of things don't affect. It might wake them up a little bit, but that's about the best you're going to get. So what they do care about is business risk. And I love this image because it perfectly explains it. How do we stop the domino effect from happening? Because one little thing leads to another little thing, which leads to another thing. Yes, there are the big Kaseya breaches that happen, for sure. But that typically is not if we were to bring, well, Blackpoint folks could talk about this, right? They could tell you right now, of all the incidents they deal with, it's not like there's 0 days that no one's ever heard of. Someone clicked on something and opened something, and that's the beginning of it. And usually it's not like push button get breach. You know, like the net with Sandra Bullock. Remember she uploads the virus? You guys remember that? It's like, and then bam, the virus is up. And it's basically in the movie. It's not like that. It takes time for the bad guys to get persistence, to understand, to escalate their privileges. In my experience, it takes about a week. Sometimes a little less, oftentimes more. So my point to this is this like idea of stopping the domino effect is a really big, powerful thing. And you can use that in your client conversations. So I think what a lot of this boils down to, I'm going to steal a page out of my really good friend David Powell's book. David always talks about this idea of teach, tailor, take control. And I love this mentality. If you start with trying to take control of a conversation before you've tailored it to that client, you're going to lose every time. If you try to tailor a conversation to that client before you have taught them, you're also very likely going to fail almost every time. So let's unpack this idea because I think it's really important. I have spent so much of my career, especially my perch days, in doing teaching. And here's what we got to. Imagine trying to sell a SIM down market, like way back in 2018 and 19. That's really, really hard. And so here's what we learned. I tell my MSPs all the time, hey, if you just get 20 of your folks on a Zoom webinar, I'll do everything else. I can handle it. And what I would do is I would teach them and not sell them. And oftentimes we would joke about like, I just sold a SIM for that MSP without ever using the word SIM. And you got to get into that habit of like, how do I sell security without spitting off a bunch of controls? You know, like Gary Pica's whole, like, sell the chocolate cake, not the ingredients, right? That same kind of mantra. Because your clients look at all this stuff you sell as car parts. They don't know what it does, where it goes into what. Do you need all of it? All they're going to do is see it all stack up and get mad at you because it seems like it's a bunch of overlap and you're just selling them stuff they don't need. So stop that and start teaching them. So if you start doing a great job at educating, you're not going to do it one fell swoop. But you are going to be able to just slowly move this needle with them and get them to understand. So I love this idea of flood zones. Here in Tampa, we have all these flood zones. And so I can look specifically into this flood zone and say, okay, based on where I live right here, this is the level of risk for me, which should impact the things that I do if a big event is coming, because I can't stop a hurricane. So what I can do is say, well, what's the impact of that hurricane to me? What does that mean for me based on the size of the hurricane? I can see it coming, all this kind of stuff. Do I get out? Do I not get out? What's my exit plan? What kind of things do I put as hurricane shutters on the windows? All this kind of stuff. I do that as commensurate to the level of risk based on where I live. If I live in Nebraska, I don't care about hurricanes. If I live in Tampa, I might or might not based on where I live. Yeah.
I'd be able to use an analogy that if you don't provide hurricane shutters for your house, OSHA won't pay your claim. Cyber insurance is the same thing. If you don't do something right within what you're supposed to, they'll deny you.
Yep.
Get them to comply.
Yep.
Well said. Well said. There's a minimum standard here, for sure. And another talk I give on cyber insurance, I talk about examples of that. And I'll just give you one. There was a situation where a client had Travelers, and Travelers is awesome, and not hating on them, but they indicated with Travelers they had multi-factor rolled out everywhere. In the aftermath of the breach, Travelers discovered, because they had access to the forensics data, that was not the case. And it wasn't that it was turned off, it was that it was never enabled. And so they are now suing that client to pull back those damages. And in my opinion, rightly so. It's the difference between turning it off and oops versus never having it and lying and saying you did. There's a big difference. Now, you can make the argument if the client didn't understand, that's fair. But from their perspective, they're in this for money too. So very, very well said. Completely agree with that minimum standard of care, for sure. So that's the first thing on teaching, right? And there are things that you can do. One of my other talks, I have like a client-facing talk that I give all the time. And these are 2 slides I'll just share. I'll just peek out of this. Jason knows I did it with his clients a while back. First thing I love to do, I don't overwhelm with statistics because it very quickly, they're just like, whatever. Oh my gosh, statistics everywhere, right? And you know, what is it? Statistics, damn sticks and lies or whatever. But there's a couple things I'll point to. One is Ponemon does a really good research, and they kind of try to take all this breach aftermath data and zero it down into the number of records. What's a record level cost for a breach? And so they discovered it always changes a little bit, but right now it's hovering around $180 a record. So I tell the client, one of the things you can do if you want to like actualize this yourself is find out how many records you have, which you should know, and then boil that down to a cost. Jason. It is way higher. Yeah, in practice, it is way higher. So you can even say that, like, this is probably a low number, right? And keep in mind, records today is not just like social security numbers, things like that. It's names, emails, addresses. Because of all these state privacy laws and what every state considers as private information, all of a sudden it's changed. And the bad guys know this. This is why we've been talking about this whole double extortion, you know, where they steal your data. They don't just ransom you, because they know if you can recover your data and not have to pay the ransom, I've lost my opportunity to make money out of you. So now I'm going to steal your data and I'm going to leverage those state regulations against you and say, if you don't pay, I am going to release this data. And now you've got a huge regulatory problem on your hands. Now I would say you already have it because they already have the data. So whether they leak it or not shouldn't impact that, right? But anyway, this helps a client to be like, oh, because here's the thing. If you ask a client, I challenge you to do this. Maybe you already are. Hey, if you had a breach, how much do you think that would cost? But what would a client say? Typically.
Millions of dollars.
What's that?
Millions of dollars,
Yeah. Yeah, and in my opinion, a lot of times they're like, most clients are like 50,000. Probably. Be about it. Yeah, depending on the client, size of the client. Yeah. Sure. Yep. Sure. So those are things you want to open up that conversation, have them understand what this stuff really costs. Another thing that I love to dive into, and again, there's studies across the board on this, but I'll ask you guys, what do you think the average downtime is from a ransomware attack? A week? 3 weeks? It could. Absolutely could depend. Yep. Yeah, you guys got it right because you're IT people. But what I'll hear from a lot of times I ask clients this question, anything from like hour, like my company said they can like recover anything instantly. I'm good. All the way up to like a year, Scott?
Yeah, that's what, when we are having this conversation, we always say, what's the cost in time and treasure? Because we're paying the bad guys as pirates of the high seas of the, where it tells the story itself, right? So time and treasure, when they start thinking about that, it's like not just the cost here, it's the cost in time. That a lot of time is the big one. And they say a week or 3 days or whatever. And then we get to have the BDR conversation. Well, remember when we did the BDR analysis and you said how long you could be down? Remember the cost then? That was 5 years ago. What's the cost today? Yeah. If you're down for that amount.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. Love it. Solid goal.
In a BDR, I mean, a great example, you don't know how long they've been in your image of that BDR, so you can't just restore back and think of it. So you could be just Groundhog Day, you could be waking up the next day to the same thing.
You just open them right back in again.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why the forensics part that you mentioned is really important to come in and understand, what happened, when did it happen, how did it happen, who did it affect? Yes. So in my experience, and a lot of study data boils down to around 16 days, if things go well for you. So I'll just tell a client, what would it mean if just half your revenue were slashed? Not counting all the other damages that you would have and lost business and lawsuits, just half your revenue for the month was slashed. What would that do for you? Set you back significantly. Yeah.
Question is, are you just talking about, when you're talking about liability? Because if I got a SIN, I can get them back up in a couple hours, obviously. You're just talking about, that's how long it takes to get cyber liability. Is that correct?
I'm talking about in most, the average, so this would boil down companies that are very well prepared that recover far faster to companies like, or City of Atlanta that are down for the better part of a year. You boil all that together, it comes through about 16 days, just from good to bad hygiene. Yeah.
So if I got a SIN with snapshots or zero copy clones, you're not talking about that. You're talking about big people.
So the security practitioner to me says, I don't know until I test that.
Well, we usually check things and go back in time.
Okay.
All right, just
Yep.
one.
And then you want to also threat model some of those scenarios of like, what happens when that guy knows you have that SAN? What things could they do before you're aware of a breach that could impact your recovery time too? But yeah.
I mean, being able to restore a server in your data center is one thing. In my experience, what's the more time consuming is the fact that you typically have to touch all the desktops
Yep.
and potentially re-image all the desktops.
Yep.
And so even if the data center is there, if the
Yep.
user's machines are down,
Yep.
you're not making any money until you finish that process, and that takes a long time.
Yep.
Depending on what tools.
And the RMM is gone and you're now rolling trucks out? Yeah. Jason?
So another thing that I don't think anyone's considering here, you may have your shiny SAN with all these shiny snapshots, but that's not going to do any good when the insurance forensics people tell you you can't have it until forensics are done and they're going to take 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's why I asked if it was about the
Oh, yeah,
insurance.
yeah,
If there's
yeah,
no, if
but
there's a company with
that's
no
the problem
insurance.
100% of the time is you usually can't touch the hardware.
Yeah,
If
sure.
forensics is involved, you have to have new hardware to restore to, and you run into limits of how fast can you actually write data to disk. It's a lot slower than you think.
That's
Because you have to bring up a parallel, potentially bring up a parallel environment of the same size.
Yeah.
Not everyone has those resources.
Yep.
To do that.
Yep. Ryan Weeks did a talk a couple years ago at Write a Boom, which I think you can get through Andrew Morgan on like disaster recovery at scale. Because the mistake that a lot of times we make is, oh, I tested recovery. I did a bare metal recovery or whatever on a machine. Great. What happens when literally everything's down for all clients? Or one client has everything down. And all of a sudden, we haven't tested that scenario. Whoops. So yeah, these are things you really want to think about. Okay, so when we're talking about the teaching, the next thing we shift into is how do I tailor this to the client? Because there's so much data that's out there and most of it's meaningless to them. We know that, right? So how do I take everything in my fingertips, everything that I have available, and how do I tailor it to them in a way that makes sense to them? Just like suits, right? There's a huge difference between a well-tailored suit and one that you just buy right off the rack. You can just tell when you're looking at somebody, that's not necessarily a cheap suit, but it doesn't fit you. It doesn't look well for you. Same exact thing. So let's talk about this a little bit. I'm going to give you some of my favorite tailored analogies. You're welcome to steal these. You're welcome to use them, but I would challenge you to use your own. Like I love the pirate treasure kind of, that's awesome. Like come up with ones that are on your own or challenge your team. Make this a fun game, right? So I'm going to give you a few. And these are ones when I talk to your clients, which I do all the time, these are ones that I actually use. So what do you see here? Give me some descriptors of what you see from this image. Lighthouse? What's that? Some waves?
Small picture.
Small picture. Yep.
A lot of white space.
A lot of white space. Yep. But nothing like really threatening and looming.
That was the white space.
That was the white space.
They call that the dark web.
That's suppose so. Here's my point on this is that's how clients see things until it hits. I have talked to clients that go through a breach and like I had no idea it was about to happen. No clue. I was not prepared. I wish I was. I remember going all the way back to like that's the number one way to make them care. So there's an analogy here for sure. Another one is clients by nature think everything's good. They're like, oh, I live in this neighborhood. I lived here forever. Like everything's good. I know my neighbors. I love where I feel super safe because nothing's happened to me before. And so they think that's the way their network is. And in reality, they're a lot more like this. Here's the thing about these slums is that they don't happen intentionally. No one designs a slum. It happens because of socioeconomic changes, all these things that happen external to it and lack of keeping up. And that is a huge thing that clients are like, oh, I hadn't really thought about that. I wonder where I'm at on this, right? The goal is not to just make them feel bad, but to get them thinking. Or like this young, scrappy Joe Biden right here. I think this looks like Joe Biden. I think it does. So a lot of times they think that what you're doing for them stops the bad stuff. The way we started this whole conversation, your stuff that you put in place stops the bad guys, and I'm good to go, right? I don't need any of that. I'm good to go. I've always been good to go because I've got antivirus and it is anti to the virus, right? So I'm good. That's what they think. In reality, that's what their security looks like a little bit more. And the more you look at this, you start to chuckle. You're like, yeah. And here's the thing. Here's what I love about this image. Who are the ones that are like driving by that little security gate? It's your own employees just trying to get work done. Like it's you. We talk about insider threat, and it is a real thing. But so often it's not like the insider is being intentionally malicious. They remember their water, just trying to get work done, just trying to get through what they want to get through. Or like this. I always love these old like 80s, 90s, slashers. So this is when a stranger calls is like the big part of the scene, back before there's all like movie tropes now. And, she calls the police and they're like, we've traced it. It's coming from inside your house. You're like, whoa, but that's how it is. So often the threat comes from inside the house, what we click on, what we visit, what we open, what we install. That's why the CyberFOX folks, what they're doing is immensely important because we have this challenge that our users introduce far more stuff and bad stuff happens in the outside world. Or same thing with this, right? This is from War Games. This is young Matthew Broderick right here. He's hacking away. This day and age is gone, my friends. Like I remember growing up in that age. Jason, we've talked about this growing up in that age where everything's open. I would spend all my nights on like ICQ and war dialing and connecting in through Sub 7 and NetButts and all that crap. Like I remember giving away free lunch codes at school because it was just the last four of your social for the proxy. And I learned how to get into the NetWare servers. So I had all that data. It wasn't like I'm elite. It's open, right? It was easy. That was the day. But there's two ways we know that this day has passed us by. One is that's not bad guys anymore. They're financially motivated, at least the ones you worry about. Second one is this. You see what I see in this image? There's a girl in here watching him hack in his bedroom. I can tell you that's never happened ever, ever, ever. It's not a thing. We've known for the longest time phishing's a big deal. We're in 2023. It's still a big, massive, colossal deal. We know that, right? So those are just a few. Oh, wait, I have more. Wait, I'm gonna give you a couple more. So my neighbor. This is the funny. So we live in Tampa, right? And I have the best neighbor ever. I live in this retired, like everyone's retired except for me and like one other family. I'm like, how did I get into this like over 55 thing? I didn't know what happened, bait and switch. But he's the coolest. You usually expect like I got 4 kids. And so I'm always like, man, they probably hate my family, but they're really awesome. He comes up to me one day. I was walking outside. He's like, Wes. He's like, hey, are you okay? Are you guys okay? I'm like, yeah, Eddie, we're great. He's like, well, is your dog okay? Your kids okay? I'm like, yeah, man, they're totally awesome. Like no problems at all. They're fine. He's like, oh, good. He's like, because we saw a coyote on the last night when I was out taking my dog. I was like, oh, wow. Now, I'm from Kentucky. So I remember, like, when you go camping, you hear them circle you. It's just a thing. We got a fire, you're fine. But it's kind of a creepy thing. So I'm thinking, you saw a coyote. I'm like, okay, like, what do you want me to do about that? Like, it's a normal thing. Like, I'm not concerned at all. But he goes and gets CCTV all around his house. He puts these signs up right here that you see here. Like, he needs you to know. There's a coyote that was spotted in our neighborhood, and that's a legit big deal. And here's what's in my brain the entire time. I'm just like, are you kidding? Like, that's what I'm worried about. Like, this stuff happens all the time. I can give you example after example. Like, we'll just walk up and just camp out. Hey, I'm going to sleep on your, like, front door today because that's just what I do. Or, like, this guy, I guess he's in, like, a war against gators or something. Like, I guess he's just had enough of them. He's, like, I think he's duct taped him, and I think he's in the middle of like handcuffing him with his little mini like gator arms. Like, I don't get it, but this guy, he's taking care of this problem. But my point is this: we over worry sometimes about the coyotes, and we're missing the alligators. And clients need to think through that. So use these as great examples. Or Tom Brady, right? We mentioned him earlier. Tom's a great example of all of this. Look at Tom here. These are images of his very first Super Bowl win. That's, I've been told, is called the Lombardi Trophy, is what people tell me. It's a pretty big deal to be a starting quarterback and win one of these things. There's an elite few people in the world that has done that. So, I mean, I get this. If I were in his shoes, I also would be as happy as he is. Well, you asked. I'm about to show you. So there's this thing called Florida Man. Anyone ever heard of Florida Man? Like hashtag Florida Man? You don't know that? Do yourself a favor and go research that term because it's awesome. I'm finishing up. I know we're almost out of time here. So even Tom Brady is not immune to Florida Man. He's been, he's got his trophy. How many trophies did he get in Boston? 6. So by the time you get your 7th, you kind of just do this a little bit. You kind of just like, now he was a little inebriated, I was told, but he just takes it on we do these boat parades, and he just takes the Lombardi trophy and just chucks it to the next boat over. Here, you guys have it. Now that's what's the guy's name? The tall guy, the Gronkowski. That's Gronk that caught it right there, which is good, right? If you're going to throw it to somebody, throw it to that dude. But my point is this. When it comes to security, we kind of get lackadaisical, don't we? Something hasn't happened in a long time. We tend to just sort of like chuck it around. We just don't care about what we're doing anymore because what could possibly happen? Those are analogies that will resonate with a client. So learn to speak in ways that will get them thinking. It can be humorous kind of stuff. It can be dripping news at them. It can be talking about how they make money, but get involved in those conversations. There is not an exact science to this. It's a zen. It's just a thing you do, and you will get better at it, and you'll feel that client out. I wish I could just say, here, read the book on do this, this, and this, and this, and follow this flow chart. That's our happy place. But this is a lot of soft skill that happens. So the more you do this, the better off we'll get. Then you can get into take control. And here's my thing on take control. You cannot take control if you do not have control yourself. So imagine I'm finally going to go get fit, right? It's about time. I walk into the gym. I've called the personal trainer. He's like, meet me here. I walk in. I see this awesome gym. I'm like, yes, I'm ready to get cut, baby. Let's get this thing going. And you walk in, and here's your bro. I'm going to walk right out. Like, there's no way I'm letting this guy teach me about personal fitness. Just not. I have a real problem with that. Now, I don't do, you can tell, this build, this cut dad bod here. I don't have that problem. But my point is this. We sometimes can be the same way. A client looks at us, they look at like what you've been doing, what you've been saying, and you're like, you're not walking the walk here. I got a problem with that. So where does this start? This starts with getting our organization in business together. Like, we've got to start rowing in the same direction. You can't have the one maverick, awesome salesperson that's great at it and everyone else is terrible. You can't have just the CEO that's like, well, I care about security and no one else talks about it. You've got to get started rowing in the direction everyone together. If you're not doing that, you're going to have problems, right? And we all look at this and we look at those rock stars. Like, it seems like every MSP has the one person that's really good at this. And we're like, wow, look at him like this. The reality, though, is that you celebrate this. You're like, look at people watch this guy do whatever that trick is that he's doing. But we all start like this. And we all got to take some humble pie and say, where is our training wheels moment? Where are we all at? Are we going to back up and really start at that beginning? And if we do that, it's going to take some time. It might stall some things. But man, investing and starting at the very beginnings for everybody is important. So here's how we do this. To build that confidence, it comes from a blueprint. You don't have to guess at security. You should never put your finger in the wind and go ask Reddit, what's in your security stack? I see it over and over and over. Who's using this for that? What are you doing for that? What's in your stack over here? And like, I think those are fun conversations and can be valuable. But I look at that, I'm like, why are we not following a framework? Anyone here that's very framework aligned? Like security framework? What's your framework?
CTNA right now is what we're working on.
Okay.
Okay. How about you?
CIS?
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 Anyone else?
Anyone else?
Yeah, no,
Yeah, no, it's great.
So if you're not,
I would recommend CIS. NIST, if you're heavily into one industry, pick one of those, don't care, but get involved. If you want resources on this, we do a podcast that's completely free. It's called The Cybercast. We go through the CIS controls. We're up to 15. We're starting 16 next month. So they're about an hour and a half to 2 hours each. It's me, Ryan Weeks, and Phyllis Lee, who's the director of the CIS controls, and Andrew Morgan's our host for it. We just unpack literally every single control and dive in. Here's what it means. You just search The Cybercast. It'll come right up. It's on Spotify, Apple, Android, all the stuff. It's everywhere. So take a look at it. Here's the great thing about frameworks. Frameworks breed confidence. This is what no one talks about, because we're hesitant to sell and pitch security because we're not sure ourselves. And I think that's fair. I had someone at DattoCon one time come up to me like, Wes, I feel like I got bait and switch. I started this IT thing fixing printers. I got into managed IT service and I'm comfortable with that. And now all of a sudden I'm this IT risk manager for all my clients. Like, what the heck happened? Past 20 years of just like, I did not sign up for this. And I don't come from that background. We feel like imposters. The way we slay that imposter feeling and syndrome is we say, there is a pathway for this. And there are thousands of people hours that have gone into these frameworks and we're following it. And we start by eating our own tacos, not our dog food. All these people say it too often. My Texas friends of ZB were here. He's like, you eat your own tacos, not your dog food. I'm like, yes. So we eat our own tacos. What we mean by that is we start aligning ourselves. Stop thinking about trying to get your clients all the way up to implementation group 2 on CIS if you haven't done it. If you start yourself first, it pushes your entire company to do the right thing. When your company does the right thing, then you have the confidence to go to those clients and be like, this works. And I know it works. That's how we do it. A couple other things. Sometimes we shift. There's all these VCIO platforms that are coming out, and they're awesome, right? There's great. But what the pitch for many of them is use our platform and we'll help you do all this. But if you haven't gone through the alignment journey first, then this is a bunch of stuff you're going to struggle with because you don't have the authenticity. You don't have the knowledge and experience. So if you're pushing to say, I want a VCIO platform to make this easy, you got the cart and the horse mixed up. Get maturity in the frameworks, then find a VCIO platform with all this cool stuff that shows you trends and peer analysis and gaps and KPIs. I love that stuff. But don't put the cart in front of the horse. If you do, it's going to stall your security progress for sure. One thing I'll give you, I don't have time to talk about this, but it's from the national academies, and I really love this from the EU. This is what they call the diagnostic process. It's a medical process. And you can take a cell phone picture of this or just Google it and find it. But it's a really cool sort of workflow on how when a patient comes into the clinic, what is it that we do to get a good diagnosis for them so that we can build a treatment plan? And what does that treatment plan as a cyclical process look like until we get to a stage where they're like a good, healthy level? And even then, it's still very cyclical. So take a look at this. I don't have time to go through it, but it starts with they experience a health problem. They come in, they engage. We have all this like data gathering stuff that we're doing, testing, lab work, all this kind of stuff. That implements a communication to the client of what the diagnosis is. It doesn't mean we know it's the problem. We just know these are some things that we're seeing. That diagnosis goes into a treatment plan. If the treatment plan doesn't quite work, it kicks back to more data. That's how we should think about our clients. What kind of data do we have? What are we seeing out of them? Where are they going? How are they growing and maturing? So dive into this. I think it's a really healthy way to think about how we can do this. And then that outputs the plan. And here's one of the most important parts that I want to chat with you about. Save the best to last. Don't come to the client with like this big network detective scan of 10,000 things they got to work on. Come to them and say, we've been framework aligned. We've taken you through this alignment journey. We've done this risk assessment process. Here's some of the pretty graphs that just showed you on where you're at. But these are the big 3 things. And then give that client the opportunity to say, hey, how do we want to tackle this? Do we want to tackle these right now? Here's the budget. Or do we want to tackle this in 3 months? Or why don't we tackle these 2 things now over the next 2 quarters? And then next year for budgeting, I want you to have this ready to go for the budget for next year. See, we often say clients don't want to pay for security. What it really is they don't want to pay right now. They feel like they sort of got it sprung on them and they're not ready for it. You've probably seen this. When you come to clients with a budget and you give them the ability for implementation and you give them time to think about it and get ready for it, they're not going to be like, oh, I love spending money, but they are going to be like, okay, I can do that. You've given me a process, 1,000 things to work on, analysis paralysis, 3 major things, and you give me a roadmap to get them done. I can do that. So that's how you got to think about it when you're talking to your client. I'm going to skip the rest of this other than just be a constant educator. Here's one thing I just came out last week, and I thought it was incredibly interesting. Pew Research just showed that now Americans now fear a cyber attack more than nuclear warfare, more than climate change, more than Russia attacking us. They fear cyber attacks more than anything. Isn't that crazy? Just across the board, Pew data shows this. I think that's interesting. I think I fear nuclear attack a lot more. I've watched all those awesome movies, right? Like that's pretty scary stuff. We're all on our own and zombies come out and all this stuff. I fear that a lot more. But clients fear this because it's an unknown. Isn't this an interesting data piece? I would bring this into a QBR and be like, hey, I want to show you this really cool article. Isn't this interesting? Like, I don't have an agenda for you. I just want to talk about it. Do you guys fear a cyber attack? Like, are you in that data? It may be like, well, no, but should I be? What am I doing wrong? Like, these are just data points. Pull out of the news interesting, relevant things to them and get them talking about it. You'd be amazed at what that does. Yeah.
The only thing that I want to mention is if you're a business owner, right? You can give them all this presentation and hopefully they can trust you or they'll trust you. But at the end of the presentation, whether you show them proof,
yeah,
in the sense of here's your financial statements that my tech just were able to pull up from my office.
Love it.
Because if they don't relate to the problem, they're not going to, I mean, in my case, with the small to medium-sized businesses, in my case, they're going to say, oh, this is great, but still not going to have it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you show them a financial statement, say, "I'll
Yeah.
pull this from your QuickBooks," and we have access for it from the outside, I think that will
Yeah.
generate a reaction.
Absolutely, it will. 100% it will. Well said. Yeah.
So on your slide of what do they care about, you had said an incident, right? Well, sometimes it's another person in their industry's incidents.
Yeah.
Colonial Pipeline was huge for us because our core vertical is manufacturing. And I mean, I had been screaming from the rooftops about a lot of the things that then all of a sudden Colonial happened.
Yeah.
And they brought it to us and said, hey, we remember you talking about this, and we need to make sure that doesn't happen to us.
Yeah.
And there it was. And it's like that.
Yeah.
That launched a strategic plan
Yep.
of the things that they told me what they valued. They didn't want that happening to them. And that changed the whole conversation.
Yep.
So,
Well said. All right, we're out of time. Hope that was helpful. Hope you got some takeaways that were useful. Thank you guys very much for your time. Really appreciate it.